The room goes quiet. Your five slides into a critical pitch. A stakeholder asks a simple question, and your mind goes completely blank. If we freeze time right at this moment, we can usually hear an internal monologue kicking in. It's the voice telling you that you're an imposter, you're out of your depth, and you simply aren't smart enough to be in this room. We fall back on those thoughts because we are conditioned to treat intelligence as a lottery. The default cultural narrative tells us that talent is a fixed trait, something handed out at birth that you either have or you don't. But look closer at the panic happening in this room. That spike of stress isn't just a sign of a mistake, it's actually the starting point of a very specific biological sequence. This feeling of intense psychological struggle is the necessary signal your brain needs to begin the process of physically changing how it functions. Stanford psychologist Dr. Carol Dweck identified that in this exact split second of failure, our brains take one of two paths. The first is what she calls the fixed mindset. Down this path, a mistake is treated as hard proof that you are inherently incapable. Because you believe your intelligence is static, failing doesn't mean your strategy was wrong, it means you are flawed. To protect your ego from that realization, you naturally withdraw. You look for external factors to blame, you decide you just aren't a numbers person, and you unconsciously avoid similar high-pressure tasks in the future. When you retreat like this, your nervous system registers no need to adapt. Electrical signals continue to travel down the exact same worn-out neural pathways. By prioritizing your immediate psychological comfort, you successfully protect your pride, but you also physically halt your own cognitive development. Let's rewind the tape back to the exact moment the pitch falls apart. The second path is the growth mindset. Here, you detach your self-worth from the error. The failure becomes objective data, a glitch to troubleshoot rather than a personal indictment. This is where psychology intersects with hard biology. According to neuroscientist Dr. Michael Kilgard, leaning into that exact feeling of frustration is what prompts the adult brain to initiate neuroplasticity. Intensely focusing on a problem slightly too hard for you releases a specific cocktail of neuromodulators, including acetylcholine and dopamine. These act as targeted highlighters, seeking out the specific neural circuits you're using to struggle through the problem, tagging them for an upgrade. The brain doesn't actually rebuild itself right then and there. The physical rewiring, the thickening of those exact connections, happens hours later when you are deeply asleep. You cannot trigger this process with toxic positivity or by blindly praising empty effort. That creates a false growth mindset. Spinning your wheels without actual progress generates zero chemical response. You have to engage in productive struggle. You change your strategy, ask for brutal feedback, and you treat the brain exactly like a physical muscle that requires heavy resistance to grow. Psychological struggle serves as the chemical signal the brain needs to start physically rebuilding itself. Let's pull out of the microscopic chemistry and look back at our presenter, still standing at the head of the boardroom table. How do you practically ensure your nervous system takes that second path? The research points to a single, highly effective word: yet. Cognitive scientist Dr. Maya Shankar explains that humans have dynamic identities. When you hit a wall and think, "I don't understand this," your brain enters a threat state. But append the word yet to the end of that sentence, and the brain shifts from a defensive posture into puzzle-solving mode. You acknowledge the gap in your knowledge, let go of the ego, take a breath, and step right back into the problem. Edison famously reframed his 10,000 unsuccessful light bulb attempts as a discovery of 10,000 ways that wouldn't work. For Edison, each mistake narrowed the search for a solution. Intelligence isn't a finished product you're handed on your first day. Your abilities are an architecture constantly under construction, and failure is the only raw material that can build it. We tend to think of human intelligence in one of two ways. It's either a rigid stone block trapped by its natural limits, or it's fluid, capable of cracking open, expanding, and learning anything. That framework comes from Stanford University psychologist Dr. Carol Dweck. But after years of watching her research spread through classrooms and corporate boardrooms, Dweck noticed a trend she called the false growth mindset. Many people assumed that adopting this mindset simply meant praising effort, acting open-minded, and maintaining a cheerful attitude toward difficult tasks. In reality, no one has a pure growth mindset. We all possess fixed mindset triggers that surface the moment a challenge becomes too hard, or when our sense of who we are is threatened. When you hit a real psychological wall, motivational posters and blind positivity fall short. To push past those limits, we have to look past psychology and examine the hard biology of learning. It is easy to sit back and watch an educational video. Passive learning feels smooth. But active learning, where you attempt a brand new skill, make mistakes, and look foolish, is messy and uncomfortable. Researchers like Dr. Andrew Huberman and Dr. Michael Kilgard describe this discomfort as friction. Their work suggests that your brain requires this specific agitation in order to initiate physical change. This diagram shows what happens when you are deeply focused and pushed slightly out of your depth. Your brain releases a specific cocktail of 4 neuromodulators: dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, and acetylcholine. That chemical release is the mechanism that allows neuroplasticity to occur. It fuses new neural pathways and thickens the connections, physically remodeling the brain's circuitry. Without that friction, those specific neural pathways aren't being signaled to remodel. If the process doesn't feel frustrating or difficult, the physical structure of your brain is not changing. Friction presents us with an immediate psychological threat. When we struggle, our first instinct is to internalize the failure as a permanent flaw in our character. Cognitive scientist Dr. Maya Shankar saw this clearly in her own life. As a child, she defined herself as a violinist, but at 15, she tore a tendon in her hand, ending her career and triggering a profound loss of identity. Labeling yourself with a noun, like prodigy or math person, makes failure feel like a death sentence. That rigid identity paralyzes the neuroplasticity process because we become too afraid to face the friction of mistakes. Shifting your self-definition towards verbs and intrinsic traits provides a safeguard. Anchoring to a deep curiosity or a love for measuring progress allows your identity to remain intact even when you fail. Even with a flexible identity, the biological friction of learning is draining. Motivation naturally spikes at the beginning and end of a goal, but it often disappears during the middle problem, that long stretch in between where the work feels most repetitive. You can manage this by making the final moments of a difficult task slightly less taxing than the peak struggle. This small adjustment changes how your brain remembers the session, making you more likely to return to the work. Surviving this process requires a dual strategy. You must abandon rigid labels that make failure personal, and you must manage how you reflect on the most difficult parts of the struggle. A growth mindset requires a daily practice of seeking out biological friction and actively managing how you define yourself. When you face a new challenge, expect it to feel terrible. Lean into the agitation of the struggle, knowing that that feeling is the exact chemical signal your brain needs to adapt. Stop using noun-based labels to define your worth. After a failure, focus on the specific process you used, rather than using the outcome to judge who you are. To combat the middle problem, shorten the timeline of your goals. If you have a bad morning, treat the afternoon as a clean start, rather than waiting for the next week to begin again. The human brain is a living, adapting system, constantly unwinding and rebuilding its own architecture based on where we place our focus. Through focused struggle, biological friction, and careful reflection, your brain maintains the physical capacity to reshape its internal connections at any age.